finding strength for the battle. And so the Thessalonian church is struggling again because of the false teaching that had infiltrated the church, and they had lost sight of what the Apostle Paul had taught them. And so he writes them this second letter, and he reminds them of some of the things that he has told them in the past. And so now we're getting to the practical part of the second letter, in the sense how this false teaching affected them in their way of life. And so we're going to read this morning. We're going to study from 6 to 13. And so let's read beginning in verse 6. Paul wrote, "Now we command you, brothers, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you keep away from any brother who is walking in idleness and not in accord with the traditions that you have received from us. For you yourselves know how you ought to imitate us, because we were not idle when we were with you, and nor did we eat anyone's bread without paying for it, but with toil and labor we worked night and day, that we might not be a burden to any of you. It was not because we do not have the right, but to give you in ourselves an example to imitate. For even when we were with you, we would give you this command: if anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat. For we hear that there are among you some who walk in idleness, not busy at work, but busybodies. Now, such persons we command and encourage in the Lord Jesus Christ to do their work quietly and to earn their own living. As for you, brothers, do not grow weary in doing well. If anyone does not obey what we say in this letter, take note of that person and have nothing to do with him, that he may be ashamed. Do not regard him as an enemy, but warn him as a brother." And so pretty strong language from the apostle, because what had taken place, remember, they thought they missed the coming of the Lord. They thought they were living in a time of tribulation. They were going through difficulties. If you remember from the first letter, they were going through suffering. They were going through afflictions. They were going through troubles. And they thought, well, we missed it. Might as well lay low and give up. And so as I was studying this, I began to think about, a number of times throughout history, people have, predicted the end of the world. And people have sold homes and businesses and gave up on everyday life, waiting for that coming day when Jesus would return and take them away. And so I've got a few incidents here I want to talk to you about. There was a fellow who interviewed, one of the most recent was Harold Camping, when the world was supposed to end in May of a couple of years ago. And so this was some of the results. He said, "I asked the question of a believer in his mid-20s. He had started listening to Harold Camping's radio show in college, and he immediately went out, bought a Bible, immersed himself in it. After graduation, he took a job as an engineer at a Fortune 500 company, a job he loved and a job he quit because he thought the world was ending. He wrote the following in his resignation letter. He said, with less than 3 months to the day of Christ's return, I desire to spend more time studying the Bible and sounding the trumpet, warning of this imminent judgment. He would not even entertain the possibility, even hypothetically, that the date could be off." And he said, this isn't a prediction, because a prediction has a potential for failure. As it turns out, believers had insisted for years that the earthquake and the rapture would take place on May 21st. But the world wouldn't be destroyed by fire for another 5 months. So this wasn't a new date. They knew all along that October 21st was significant. Of course, I'll be disappointed if it doesn't happen. A believer who had helped organize the RV caravans that were prior to May 21st told me, God's not going to let us down. It was a father of 3 boys who works in the financial industry. He told me he was fairly sure this would be the end. After May 21st, his faith was so shaken that he apologized on Facebook to the friends he had tried to convert. I've been convinced for 10 years that this would be it. Another engineer said he spent most of his retirement savings, well over $500,000, taking out full-page newspaper ads plans, and he bought an RV that he had custom painted with doomsday warnings. Other believers had no trouble recalling what they now viewed as an enormous embarrassment. Once October came and went without incident, the father of three was finished. After October 22nd, his main concern now was his sons. He said, "My wife and I joke that when my kids get older, they're going to say that we were the crazy parents who believed the world was going to end." And so this failed prophecy caused real harm, financial and emotional and spiritual ruin. So what was a curiosity for the rest of us was for them traumatic. There was a gifted young musician who abandoned music, quit his job, put his life on hold for 4 years. It cost him his friends. It created a rift between some members of his family, but he couldn't have been more committed. In a recent email that he had sent this research guy, he said to him, he had definitely lost an incredible amount of faith and hadn't touched his Bible in months, and now he's not sure what to believe. And so the impact, that this false teaching has, and it's ongoing, that, throughout the history, there's been people predicting the end of the world. The Bible simply tells us that we don't know. We're not going to know, that no one can know. And so I tell you, when somebody predicts the end of the world, I know that's not the date. I know for sure that's not it, because they don't know. And in 1166, there was a call for the end of the world. Christians in 17th century Europe feared the end of the world because of the number 666. So 1666. And they were afraid that when the Great Fire that broke upon London September 2nd, 1666, they thought that was the doomsday fire. The world was going to be ending. How about this one? In 1806, a domesticated hen in England appeared to lay eggs inscribed with the message, "Christ is coming." People in great numbers visited the hen and began to despair of the coming judgment. It was soon found out, however, that the eggs were not prophetic messages, but the mischief of the owner, who wrote on the eggs in corrosive ink and then reinserted them into the poor hen's body.
Oh, jeez.
Halley's Comet in 1910. Halley's Comet passes by the Earth approximately every 76 years, but in the year 1910, the closeness of its approach created fear in the mind of an astronomer that it would destroy the planet. A global panic arose, fueled by newspaper headlines as "Comet may kill all life on Earth." That was from the scientific community. A group in Oklahoma even went on to sacrifice a virgin to ward off impending doom. And bottled air became a hot commodity. 1914, the Jehovah's Witnesses. Charles Taze Russell predicted that Christ would return in 1914, marking the end of human rulership. And since that prophecy failed, the society predicted 7 additional dates when the apocalypse would occur. And later it resulted in an apology to the members from the society's leadership. Now, if you remember, Harold Camping did the same thing. However, people had spent all their money, sold their homes, sold their businesses, and that wasn't coming back. How about this one in 1988? Han Ming-chen, a Taiwanese religious leader, preached that God would appear on U.S. television network 18 on March 25th, 1988, to announce the end of days. The physical form of God was to be seen. And amazingly, he looked identical to Chen. Well, 1997, remember the Hale-Bopp comet? A whole group of people committed suicide. It said in 1997, rumors surfaced that an alien spacecraft was following the comet, backed by NASA and astronomical community. Such claims inspired a San Diego UFO cult called Heaven's Gate to conclude that the world would end. It all went a bit too soon, or a bit too far, when 39 of them committed suicide on March 26th. And we all remember Y2K, right? 2000. How about believers prayed to aliens to rescue them in 2012? Ahead of December 21st, which marks the conclusion of the 5,125-year-long count Mayan calendar. There was a panic buying of candles and essentials was reported in China and Russia. along with an increase in sales of survival shelters in America, France. In France, people prepared to collect on a mountaintop where they believed the aliens would come and get them. There's the World War III of 1917. We missed that. A self-styled clairvoyant, Horatio Villagis, who claimed to have accurately predicted the rise of Donald Trump based on biblical readings, has had a dream where he saw balls of fire falling from the sky and hitting the earth. He said the main message that people need to know in order to be prepared is that between May 13th and October of 2017, this war will occur with much devastation, shock, and death. The next one coming down the road is the robocalypse. Robots and apocalypse put together. In 2030, in a world where everything is controlled by technology, the day isn't far when robots will rule. This is a prediction from a Wired article by Bill Joy, who's the co-founder of Sun Microsystems. He described the ways in which tech is involved so quickly that it will sooner than later overtake human evolution and bring about the extinction of our society. And then there's one in 6,000, which will happen in the year 2240. The Hebrew calendar declares our universe was created 3,760 years before the birth of Christ, which means that 2240 is actually the year 6,000. And so in the year 2240, Mother Earth will undergo a period of humongous upheaval all over the geography of the world. You know, people take this stuff seriously, and it ruins their lives. And then when it doesn't happen, it ruins their faith. You know, and so that's what we're seeing here happening to these folks in Thessalonians. So what's the answer to this madness? Fear and worry, anxiety is exhausting them, and it's producing sluggishness and laziness, which are the words that Paul uses here in the passage we spoke. They've begun to just give up. Verse 6, he says, "Now we command you, brothers, in the name of our Lord Jesus, that you keep away from any brother who's walking in idleness and not in accord with the tradition that you have received from us." Let's look at what the foundation from which Paul is working from. Turn back in the book of Proverbs and look at verse 6. Chapter 6. Chapter 6, verse 6. And he says, "Go to the ant, O sluggard, consider her ways and be wise. Without having any chief, officer, or ruler, she prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest. How long will you lie there, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man." You know, so go and observe the diligence, you know, of the ant, even as an example of an illustration of just keeping busy, you know, performing the tasks and responsibilities that you have before you. Look at chapter 12. We're going to stay in Proverbs for a little bit here. Look at chapter 12 and verse 27. It says, verse 27, "Whoever is slothful will not roast his game, but the diligent man will get precious wealth." You know, that was a problem then. People would kill an animal and just take what they needed for the moment and leave it there to, you know, leave the carcass there to rot and die. And that was a problem in the Old West with the buffalo hunts when the settlers were moving in. And so God hates that. You know, God says, listen, you know, that's slothful. That's just lazy. It's irresponsible. And so take care of what you have, and don't be lazy and throw it away. Proverbs 10, chapter 10, and verse 4. "A slack hand causes poverty, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. He who gathers in summer is a prudent son, but he who sleeps in harvest is a son who brings shame." You know, there's a time that things need to be taken care of, And to put them off is not the right way to go about it. And so he says, there's a lack of effort. There's a lack of diligent effort in the time that it's needed. They couldn't let stuff sit around. Things need in an agricultural society. You needed to do what you needed to do when you need to do it, and that same principle applies to us today. Don't put it off. If something needs to be done, you need to get on it and get it done. Chapter 10, verse 26. He says, like vinegar to the teeth and smoke to the eyes, so is the sluggard to those who send him. It's painful when people simply refuse to follow through on tasks and responsibilities that they have agreed to or that have been assigned to them. And so it's unreliable. The laziness, the lack of diligence in the workplace is destructive. We've all experienced lazy coworkers, and we can appreciate what this says. It's terrible. We hate to be stuck on the same team with people who will not shoulder their share of the burden. They agree to it, or again, they've been assigned to it, and they just won't follow through and do it. Look at chapter 24. Verse 30. And it says, I passed by the field of a sluggard, by the vineyard of a man lacking sense. And behold, it was all overgrown with thorns. The ground was covered with nettles, and its stone wall was broken down. And then I saw and considered it, and I looked, and I received instruction. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. And poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man. Again, he says that same principle. It's a matter of being diligent, doing what needs to be done when it needs to be done. I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow, and tomorrow never comes. Tomorrow never seems to come. And so you have to know what needs to be done, and then you have to prayerfully plan ahead to make sure that you know what you need to do. And so the laziness that was being displayed by the Thessalonians, left unchecked, would have devastating long-term effects, like some of these modern examples that I read to you. They needed to get back on track. They needed to start planning ahead. See, they didn't think there was an ahead. They didn't think there was anything worth living for. And I hear that a lot of times today. And you know what? Today. Be and do all the things that God has called you to be and do. Do all the things that you're responsible to do. Take on your tasks, take on your responsibilities, and get busy. Proverbs 21. Verse 5. The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty. And so, that principle is to not be so quick to hurry up and get something done and do a shoddy job, but stick with it, do it well. The word diligent here means sharp, like mentally sharp. And they're planning ahead, and they're working hard to make your decisions based on some long-term consequences with those in mind. Back to 27, Proverbs 27. Beginning in verse 23. He says, know well the conditions of your flocks and give attention to your herds, for riches do not last forever. And does a crown endure to all generations? When the grass is gone and the new growth appears and the vegetation of the mountains is gathered, the lambs will provide your clothing, the goats the price of a field. There will be enough goat's milk for your food. for the food of your household and the maintenance for your girls. And so wise planning, it requires good decision making, thinking ahead, thinking for the long term. We see this example in the agricultural asset management, where they have to plan for those things that are coming down the road. They had cycles and times that needed to be done. Go back to 24, Proverbs 24 and verse 27. He says, prepare your work outside. Get everything ready for yourself in the field. And after that, build your house. That would have taken some long-term planning. Make sure that the crops are growing. Make sure that you can sustain yourself. Make sure you have the resources that you need to keep going, and then start building. That's long-term, right? That's looking down the road. That's planning ahead. Look at Luke 14. We'll come back to Proverbs, but look at Luke 14. Verse 28. Verse 28 says, for which of you desiring to build a tower does not first sit down and count the cost? You have to make a plan. You have to have a business plan. You have to think ahead. Count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it. Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it will begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build, but he wasn't able to finish. He couldn't follow through. He didn't plan well. He didn't think ahead enough. He didn't get all the variables in play. So Jesus agrees, of course, with the principles from Proverbs. And you can notice the link between our relationship to God, between the wisdom in the form of planning and in God's character. Let's go back to Proverbs 16. He says this, the plans of the heart belong to man, but the answer of the tongue is from the Lord. God is involved in all this planning. And so invite him in, lots of saturate your plans with prayer. Saturate your prayer with asking God to give you insight and wisdom to how to know to move forward. Chapter 19. And verse 21. It says, many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand. So God is involved. Make sure you're on the same page with the Lord as much as you're able to with prayer. Again, go in biblical principles. Look at James 4. In verse 13. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. And what is your life? For you are but a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will do this or that. So as it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. And so he's talking about long-term planning, but he's talking about long-term planning without God in it. And he's saying, that's sinful. He wants you to make that long-term plan, but he wants God in it. He wants you to invite God in and pray if the Lord wills. And so whoever knows to do the right thing and fails to do it, for him it is sin. We hear that a lot quoted independently, and I'm sure it applies in other areas. But here he's talking about long-term planning and having God be a part of it. Let's go back to Proverbs, chapter 27. This is where James got that principle. Verse 1 of 27, do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring. Who does know? God knows. We don't know, right? So we need to bring God in and try to gain insight and wisdom from him. Because unlike God, we do not have the power to make all our plans come to pass. But we can plan with wisdom, we can speak with humility, we can live with expectation that God's plans are our ultimate desires. And we want God's plans to be our plans. Look at chapter 22 and verse 3. It says the 22:3, the prudent man sees danger and he hides himself, but the simple go on and they suffer for it. They're just not paying attention, not looking down the road. When I'm working with people, I'll ask them, do you ride a bicycle? Yes. Okay. When you're riding that bicycle, do you stare at your feet? Do you watch how you pedal the bike? Oh, of course not. Okay, so where are you looking? Oh, you're looking down. Why are you looking down the road? Because you don't want to run into somebody or something or have a tree branch knocking in the head. This morning, as I was riding in on my motorcycle, I went to take a left turn, and I was looking down the road, and there was this brand new big giant pothole. And I was like, oh no, and I was able to get around it. I mean, you got to be looking, paying attention at the things that are relevant for the moment. Look at chapter 25. In verse 28, the last verse in the chapter, 25:28 says, a man without self-control is like a city broken into and left without walls. Right? I mean, the wall around the city was there for what? For protection and defense of the city. And so if you have no self-control, if you just go rushing off and you like to live spontaneously and you don't have any long-term plans, you're defenseless. That's what he's saying. That city is defenseless. And with the lack of self-control, then there's no desire to sit down and plan thoroughly and look down the road and get the information that you need. Make it a practice to do something every day that you really don't want to do. You remember Jesus in the garden, right? Father, not my will, but yours be done. Teach that. Teach it to yourself, teach it to your children. Learn to delay gratification. Learn to wait on things, to plan, and to see them come together down the road. And so, regrettably, the Thessalonians, they're not living this way. They've given this up. You see, this would have been the foundation of understanding from Paul, a diligent work ethic that plans ahead, that's wise and prayerful, and it's about your relationship to God, and you gain that insight from the Lord. This is what they're walking away from because they've been shaken and alarmed. They're now living in that culture of fear that all their hopes and dreams have been destroyed, which wasn't true. And so the Proverbs, alongside with Jesus' own words, show that it's both correct. It's both incorrect and self-indulgent not to plan ahead. Live like Jesus is coming today. Plan like he's not coming for 100 years. It may be exciting to live spontaneously, but it's not wise. The trouble began with them listening to the false teachers and the false prophecies that leads to that culture of fear. They're anxious, they're worried, they think there's no use to continue, they've given up, in the Bible's language, they have fainted or lost heart. They've checked out. However, they still need to live a functional, practical lifestyle. They still need to eat. They still need to buy and sell. They still need to live everyday lives, but they're no longer providing for themselves. And so now they're looking for others to provide for them. And so that's why Paul can say, listen, if nobody's working, then they shouldn't be eating. Because again, as you look through the Old Testament, you find these principles of someone who wasn't willing. In the summer when they should have been working hard, they were off swimming at the swimming hole. And then winter came and their crops weren't there. So they still needed to eat, but they didn't have anything for themselves. So now they're out there asking for all their neighbors. to provide for them. And Paul's saying, listen, that's not right. That's what he's telling these Thessalonians. Voltaire, who was really not a friend of Christians, but I was reading another book and came across this quote, and he said, it's not inequality which is the real misfortune, it's dependence. Dependence is the real misfortune. And so the source of their troubles is not understanding Scripture, and it's buying into the false teaching that was prevalent in their time. And so, false prophecies will lead you away from the truth, and they will have devastating consequences. And so, again, what is the answer to the badness? It's really very simple. Live diligently for today. In all your tasks and all your responsibilities, love the Lord thy God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. Take on your tasks and responsibilities and give them everything you have. Look back, you're in Proverbs, but look at Ecclesiastes, one book over, chapter 11. And verse 4. And it says this, he says, he who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. You see, they're finding a reason not to do what they should be doing. Verse 5 says, as you do not know the way that the spirit comes into the bones and the womb of a woman with child, so you do not know the work of God who makes everything. In the morning, sow your seed, and at evening withhold not your hand, for you do not know which will prosper, this or that, or whether both alike will be good. You do what you're supposed to do, and God will always do what he will do. So look for reasons to get things done. Don't look for reasons not to do the things that you're supposed to do. So number one, live diligently. Number two, get things done when they're supposed to get done. Number three, diligently search and know the scriptures to know these kinds of principles. Because remember, again, this is the foundation that Paul is bringing to the Thessalonians. He's applying these Old Testament principles, which was the Bible that they had at the time, right? And so that's what he's applying to them when he's talking to them about the difficulties that they're going through. And again, don't do it just to be successful. Again, if people will rush through things, and not do it well just to get to the outcome. But God says, wait on the outcome. Don't do it just to be successful. Do it because you love God. And do it because you want to please him in what you're doing and in the way that you're doing it. Because at the bottom line, this is about their relationship to God. This is about living out the principles of God's word in ways that glorify him and ultimately are better and best for us. So the Thessalonians had to respond. We'll that was more of an overview of that section, and we'll look into it a little more deeply in the coming days. And so thank God he's given us all the abilities to do the things that are pleasing to him and the way that's pleasing to him, so that we can be pretty much all set in those things. Plan ahead and love the Lord doing it. Let's sing our final song. Living